Today we're making two versions of the same stool using different methods of construction and materials. Boom! This is basically the same stool design, but each version uses different methods and materials, so the end results are quite distinct. The only part that really looks similar is the red velvet cushion, because everything else looks and feels totally different just by changing the material and the building process. The first version is all CNC'd on the x-carve from Inventables, and it's made out of birch plywood. The second version, that is made out of solid wood, can also be done on the x-carve or with power tools or with hand tools. The great thing about sending a design to be cut on a computer-controlled machine is that you can have lots of repetition without much effort. So let's say you need 6 tools like this and you have a CNC machine around and some plywood sheets. There's not much more needed to complete the project. I only used a file and a few clamps and a driller besides the x-carve. So I kept placing some plywood scraps I had until all parts were carved, and I screwed them directly to the machine table, making sure that none of the screws is on the milling path. Once the pieces were cut, I took a couple minutes sanding the rough edges since I was using a not so sharp upcut straight bit. I can now cut the tabs and pop out each component. You might notice that I got some upgrades on the hardware, being the cutting height much higher now and the Z-axis a lot sturdier. This upgrade kit was sent to me by TBD CNC and was pretty easy to install and recalibrate. The x-carve is a lot more robust now, but I haven't put it to stress test just yet, so I'll leave the thoughts on the subject for a future episode. I'll have the links for the machine and the upgrade kit on the description below. Now that the base section is cut, I need a frame to rest the cushion on, so I placed another scrap of plywood and went to town. Eventually a compression bit came in the mail, so I replaced the previous upcut bit for this one to see if there was any improvements on the cut quality. But turns out that this bit is supposed to cut over 3 mm on the first pass in order to the downcut part of the spiral be hitting the surface of the plywood and produce a super clean edge. I didn't know this at the time, so you'll later see how the cuts were not as clean as expected. It worked fine here on the seating panel though, because this is pre-finished plywood. Now it's time to do a little handwork and square up these rounded corners. Alternatively, you could round the stretcher ends instead if you prefer. I applied a few points of C8 glue in conjunction with the wood glue to give a quick tack while clamping and not having the pieces sliding misaligned, but that step is skippable. After some sanding and a couple holes on the seating frame, the stool was ready to be glued together. The joints were pretty snug, so I didn't apply that much glue. While it is drying, I can start working on the cushion. So I cut 2 pieces of 20 mm foam to size and spray glue them together as well as to the plywood base. If you are wondering why it has 4 holes underneath, it is for the air to escape when someone sits. If the air can't escape, the fabric might tear and your nice cushion will be destroyed. I found that using the cardboard box was a great solution not to getting excess glue sprayed all over the place. After covering the foam with a layer of polyester batting, I cut the excess and stapled the red velvet as best as I could. I definitely need to upgrade my upholstery skills, but thankfully this face will never be seen, unless you flip the stool over. And the first version is done. Now let's work with some solid wood. I had this beech board forever on my studio, so I decided to finally make something with it. It is pretty warped and I don't have a jointer, so I grabbed the hand plane and removed some material on the higher spots until there wasn't much wobble. I then utilized a method for planing a board on the thickness planer, and it worked really well. It consists on having a straight plywood panel and placing wedges on areas where there is a gap between the plywood and the board to be flattened. This will prevent the rollers inside the thickness planer from pushing that cupped area down, therefore creating a perfectly straight top surface. You need to make multiple passes until the entire board is nice and flat. I can now remove the wood board from the jig and plane the other face normally, as now I have a good reference to create a parallel face from. This version of the stool is all constructed using half-lap joints, and I'll show you how this can be achieved both using the x-carve and regular power tools. For the x-carve method, it's crucial to measure the exact thickness of the board to adapt your design. It's a good idea to make a test first and make sure the half-laps are well fitted before cutting all the components. And here's the new compression bit not working properly because I should have it going deeper on each pass. Once your pieces are cut, the procedure is very similar to the plywood stool. You need to release the pieces from the tabs and square up the rounded inside corners of some of the joints. Now for the power tool method, I started by slicing the board in 3 by 3 cm strips on the table saw. There was some burning from the table saw blade, so I gave them a few passes on the drum sander. I could then cut them to length, and something scary happened. You can see what happened in detail on my Instagram post, but basically the steel square was forgotten on the saw and was pushed into the blade by the plastic protection cover. The ruler was projected and thankfully nothing hit me. The square body got eaten up by the blade and the ruler got bent and the blade lost one tooth. This was a very happy ending situation, and I included this event just to force us remember how safety is always so important and we should never lose our attention over what we're doing. So the next day I made a crosscut sled for the new table saw and continued the project. I kept cross-cutting to size all the legs and stretchers and then starting the half-lap joinery. I started by making a test to know what to expect, and it looks very nice and tight, but the bottom cut was a little oversized, so there was this gap. I had to find the perfect fit and work from there. I only made the nice and straight pencil marks on one leg because the other 3 will follow that one. I sketched these on every leg so I don't get confused, but the perfect measurements are only marked on the first leg. So I clamped the stop block for the first cut line, and it was a matter of repeating the cut for the rest of the legs. I repeated the process for the second cut of the half lap that, by the way, can be done using a handsaw, so you can make this entire stool using only hand tools if you prefer. I snapped a little bit of the joint to be able to insert the stretcher and see how big or small the cut was. It was great, so I kept cutting the other legs. You can make adjustments to the stop block to make sure the joints come out snug. The material in the middle will then be removed with a chisel. If you have a dado blade, this would be a great opportunity to use it, or even a flat teeth saw blade, which I don't have. The tops of the legs and the stretchers themselves have the joinery on the ends, which makes it possible to cut on both directions and create the joint entirely on the table saw. All you have to do is to clamp the pieces in place vertically. So here I was chiseling the remaining middle sections of the joints. It really helps to mark the center line with a knife or a marking edge because you can fit the chisel on the scored line to get a perfect cut. As the middle line is approaching, it's better to chisel only halfway and flip the piece over to continue, to avoid snapping off too much material from the face that is facing down. After checking everything for fit, I could finally work on the glue up. I sanded everything smooth and chamfered the bottom of the legs to prevent them from splitting when in contact with the floor. We still need to make the seating frame, so I glued a few strips of beech that were leftovers from the initial board and left the ends shorter in some of them to create automatic half laps. I also attached the frame with screws to the stool legs just like I did for the plywood version. So I drilled a bunch of holes, some to put the frame together and some to attach later to the stool legs. Unfortunately, there was a little gap on one side. I probably rounded that area a little bit when using the palm sander, so I snapped the heavy shaving from a scrap piece and pressed it firmly into the gap. After 2 coats of hard wax, we're almost done. Last thing we need is another cushion, and for that I cut a 6mm birch plywood rectangle and drilled 4 holes, just like the one in the first version. The upholstery steps were repeated and it just fits snugly in place. You can attach it with screws from underneath, but I don't think it is necessary as this is pressure fitted. And here they are, 2 stools that came from the same idea and overall design, but look very different due to the construction method and the chosen materials. I'm not sure which one I prefer, but I think that the solid wood makes me feel a little more proud, and it could also be my tendency for a crisp and square design. It just feels more elegant. Even though the rounded plywood option is still pretty cool and has a cuter look, maybe not so serious. I don't know, let me know which one you prefer in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Alright, so thanks everyone for watching, thanks to Inventables and my Patreon members for the continuous amazing support. And if you're interested in supporting my work too, head over to my Patreon page. I recently updated the reward section, so take a look and see if this is for you. Oh, and if you're new to the channel, take a moment to subscribe and hit the bell so you always get notified when a new video comes up. Thanks everyone, and don't forget to get your hands dirty!